This paper is presenting observations from my PhD research. I'm interested in divergent value systems that coalesce within what we refer to as the food movement, the social ruptures that are created when these divergences become apparent, and the space that those ruptures create for prefigurative social action. So I've been doing fieldwork and interviews for the past 3 years amongst local food system actors in New York's Hudson Valley. And one of the most profound sites of this rupture and this prefigurative work is amongst seed keepers in the region, which are the focus of this presentation. Okay, so just to give you some orientation to my field site, it's the Hudson Valley, which is denoted by this little teal circle here. That's about 640 kilometers north of Manhattan along the Hudson River. New York State, for a sense of scale, is over 140,000 square kilometers, and it's primarily a rural state despite being best known for the metropolis of New York City. Prior to European contact, the Hudson Valley was home to dozens of complex indigenous societies, including the Lenape, Wappingers, Mohican, Delaware, Iroquois, Munsee, Anishinaabe, and others, all of whom suffered dislocation and genocide after the arrival of Henry Hudson, who claimed the territory for the Dutch East India Company. So people today in the Hudson Valley are situated within these contested histories of indigenous and colonial narratives, contested identities of urban and rural, and the seed keepers within this heterogeneous social network find themselves at the center of this tension. I argue that this is because seeds are both uniquely adaptable to hyper-local ecosystems and are propitious global travelers. They sit at the nexus of these socio-political and material contestations. So you can see in this map here, this just gives you a sense of the geographic origins of major crops that have taken root in the global market. The movement of seeds obviously is as ancient as the movement of peoples, but the distances and frequency of seed travel has increased alongside the rise of globalization. In the timeline of human and seed interactions, the formal seed economy is quite young. Jack Kloppenberg traces it to the mid-19th century, which is when private capital became interested in rationalizing seeds as a commodity. So Western technocratic ontology allowed this commoditization and enabled the estrangement of people from seeds. You can see in this chart, what I think is really interesting about it is those big red circles, which really dominate the entire seed industry. Those are almost entirely pharmaceutical or chemical companies. So they're really seeing seed as a technology equivalent to all the other agricultural inputs that they sell, right? The result of this is a drastic decrease in what we call agrobiodiversity. And this diagram shows the decline in agrobiodiversity as manifested in commercial availability of food seeds for 10 common garden varieties over the course of the 20th century. In response to that declining seed diversity and agrobiodiversity, the saving and exchanging of seeds in North America, in the US, and in other places was increasingly framed with political overtones. And this has led to the idea of heirloom and heritage seeds. So the first public use of the word heirloom as applied to plants was in 1970. Broadly speaking, today, heirloom seeds are seeds that are open pollinated rather than hybrid, meaning they're able to produce seeds that will grow a plant that's the same as their mother plant, so they grow true to type, and to seeds for plant varieties that were developed in the heyday of American plant breeding in the 1930s. So heirloom seed catalogs will feature images like this one of the rutabaga, also known as a swede, that are like these really vintagey, brightly colored seeds. This come from seedsman Luther Burbank's marketing of seeds through his really brightly colored catalogs. You'll notice in catalogs like this that most of the narratives that accompany these seeds are from a European settler perspective. And this is maybe best exemplified by the names of plants that you'll find with indigenous origins, so plants that were indigenous to the United States, with names like the Jacob's cattle bean or the Long Island cheese pumpkin or a calico corn, names that are very clearly not from their community of origin. So this seed keeping community in the States is really steeped in the alternative food movement and second wave back the land ethos of the 1970s. These have both been critiqued thoroughly in the literature as spaces that replicate whiteness. But what I'm finding in the Hudson Valley is that seed keepers who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color are disturbing these really shallow histories and are creating new, There's a terrible typo in my text here. Anyway, they're disturbing these shallow histories and are creating a new opportunity for seed saving circles. So in contrast to heritage or heirloom seeds, I want to talk a little bit about indigenous seeds. As an example, this corn here is known as autophylle corn. Ken Green, who is one of my primary interlocutors, founded the first seed library, founded the Hudson Valley Seed Company, and runs an educational nonprofit called Seed Shed, often uses this to illustrate how his eyes were open to the erasure of indigenous narratives within the seed community. He used this story to open a panel at the Northeast Organic Seed Conference in 2018, where he said he met this corn as an Italian heirloom being marketed to chefs as a polenta corn. And eventually learned from Rowan White, who is a Mohawk seed keeper, that this 8-row corn is actually really distinctive of the Shoshone people's flint corn. So 8-row, autophylle in Italian. The Shoshone contribution to the breeding of this plant had been lost in its travel back and forth across the Atlantic. So he introduced this panel and then invited the speakers on the panel to tell a story of seed that would decommodify that seed, that would bring it back into a more complicated story right here in the present, right? As that panel continued, it became clear that embracing the heterogeneous past of seeds created both the potential for social cohesion and for social rupture. One of the white seed keeping elders in attendance at the conference challenged a Black panelist who had told a seed story that connected the black-eyed pea to the enslavement of Africans whose unpaid labor had built the wealth and agricultural systems of the US. And I've found this repeatedly, that white people who really find identity in heritage seed narratives can struggle to confront the context of patriarchal capitalist white supremacy as theorized by bell hooks that has unknowingly underpinned their relationship to land, food, and seed. So this white elder was really incensed that the panelists claimed that the Black descendants of enslaved peoples had a more authentic connection to the food than the white woman did. She'd grown up poor in the American South, savored this food with her family as well. When the panelists pointed out that regardless of the class oppression their families shared, no descendants of voluntary European migrants would know how to cook or even have access to black-eyed peas if the enslaved African immigrants that were her ancestors hadn't hidden those seeds in their braided hair to bring them to this continent. And that moment was wild. The tension in the room was absolutely palpable. It felt on the verge of real crisis, real rupture. So into that rupture, Rowan White spoke these words that I'm just going to read from this slide. Inside the seeds that sit before me, there's a seed song. Our people, we know, we sing the seed songs to our plants when we plant, when we stir them from their wakening in the middle of winter, and when we are harvesting, when we are tending. There's a seed song of resistance inside of these seeds, and there's a seed song of remembrance, and also these seeds hold a seed song of reconciliation. Because these particular seeds that are sitting in front of me were grown by many hands and many hearts, coming from many different lineages and diasporas, right? We are, many of us, far flung from our indigenous and native village hearths. So what I find really compelling about this peacemaking offering that Rowan offered up, that Rowan was stating, is the inversion of settler colonialism that she uses in order to flatten the hierarchy imposed by settler colonialism. She doesn't ignore the rupture, instead she names it, names the rift in the racialized histories of Americans as an opening into the present moment for new and different ways of being together. And there are on-the-ground activities that mimic this in the Hudson Valley. So this picture here is of Elder Stephen Macomber from the Anishinaabe Reservation, which is up on the Canadian border of New York, coming down into the Hudson Valley to replant corn seeds and to teach both white and Mexican immigrant and other immigrant folks how to grow and braid and preserve these corns, which are then taken back to the reservation as a ceremonial food for the Anishinaabe youth that Stephen is mentor to. So this relationship with seed is opening up new possibilities that are not distant from the conflict, but are embracing of the conflict. And I want to just close by saying you may think that I'm using these seeds as a metaphor to explain something about human interactions, but the seeds themselves are living beings. They're shaped by this process as much as the humans are. And so what is really required is a more than human understanding through which we can see that the seed keepers' explicit aim of protecting and proliferating biodiversity that aim itself is adapting to enfold a more expansive mandate that protects and proliferates cultural diversity as well. Thank you very much.